Hey everybody, it's Eric Pappenfoos. It's Friday, so it must be a bye day. And this past week, Cathy and I have been on vacation in New Orleans. Look, Cathy, there's a trolley car going by right now.
Oh, yeah.
And off in the distance here, you can also see one of the famous paddle boats, the Natchez. We've had a wonderful, wonderful week, and we're going to take you now to some of our favorite literary spots along a literary walking trail of New Orleans. But we wanted to start here. We're on the banks of the mighty Mississippi River, and we're here at a plaque that is dedicated to the Middle Passage and the transatlantic slave trade. New Orleans history is deeply rooted in that trade, and we're going to explore some questions of race today, especially when we make it to our first stop. But I also wanted just to say that the reason that New Orleans is called the Crescent City has to do with the fact that we are on a crescent. If you pan out and look at the Mississippi, you can see that the city itself in crescent fashion is here. We're also up high on the levee, which will get breached when it floods. But we'll see in just a few minutes at our first stop. Okay, everybody, we've made it to our first stop, which is the very site where back in 1892, Homer Plessy boarded a segregated train car here in New Orleans in an effort to challenge what were then the stringent segregationist Jim Crow laws of the South. Plessy was chosen by a committee of many individuals, some of whom were free blacks that had even more rights prior to the American Civil War, but were watching them being sort of rolled backward due to the Jim Crow laws of the Reconstruction period. And one of the things that's interesting about the case is, and this is, of course, years before Rosa Parks, but they were explicitly trying to challenge the laws under the basis of the 14th Amendment, and they failed. And so today Plessy is known as a failure, but he really should be known as somebody who was ahead of his time, trying very hard to push the boundaries of his time. One of the things that's interesting to me about the case, and we also went to Homer Plessy's grave site, didn't we, Cathy?
Yes.
And that's in St. Louis Cemetery number 1. About a couple miles from here. Show you a photo of that so you can see it. We couldn't film inside the cemetery. That's a very famous cemetery because all the graves are above sea level, above the water table, and it makes for some really interesting monuments. But when it came time for the committee and Plessy to choose a lawyer to go to the Supreme Court, do you know who they chose?
Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting story. They actually chose a novelist. Yes, he was a lawyer too, but he was a novelist who had basically made a name for himself writing a series of bestsellers that sold several 100,000 copies, including A Fool's Errand and Bricks Without Straw. We have both of these at the Scholar, and I decided to bring one with us today just so you could get a little feel for it. The author's name was Albion Tourget. There he is. You can see he was a lawyer as well, late judge at the Superior Court of North Carolina. But what he did in the 1880s and 1870s during the Reconstruction period was he wrote a series of novels that were all about the Deep South and all about the racism and the rise of Jim Crow, told from the perspective of the freedmen, which he very sort of carefully described as basically pushing back against all the racism that they were seeing. It's a fascinating novel. It's a really interesting one. Tourget believed first and foremost in education. And he had his characters talk about the importance of the federal funding of education. Let me read you a little bit from 516. Not my remedy, but the only remedy is to educate the people until they should be wise enough to know what they ought to do and brave enough and strong enough to do it. And then it goes on a little bit. Well, but it's the state's role to govern, to educate the people. Well, no, when it became an unavoidable question whether union or slavery should live, you chose the union. The choice may come between the union and ignorance. And if it does, I have no fear to which the people will choose. And he fought for federal funding of education. And of course, Tourget eventually loses the case, but his books were so dramatically different from the rest of Southern literature at the time that the committee was inspired to choose him to represent them. And that's why we thought we'd start. If you come to the Scholar today, You can find several of Tourget's novels and some of his nonfiction works as well for sale. All right, we're going to head off to our next stop. Well, we've reached our next stop, and it is the home of the person, the author most identified with New Orleans, and that was the great playwright Tennessee Williams. If you look behind me here, you see this beautiful Greek Revival home. It was the last home that Tennessee Williams owned. He had previously rented and lived in many different places throughout New Orleans ever since he came here in the late 30s as a writer for the WPA project. Williams, of course, most known for his plays. Well, A Streetcar Named Desire ran not very far from here. Cat on a Hot Tin Roof could have easily been on one of these roofs. We're going to make it over here to the plaque where you can see that he actually lived on the second floor and he rented out the first floor, which is sort of cool. I hope to die in my sleep in this beautiful big brass bed in my New Orleans apartment. The bed that is associated with so much love. He considered New Orleans his spiritual home. And he actually died of a drug overdose, sadly, in New York City, but he spent the last years of his life here. And I did bring a book, and that is a book that he wrote here. It's called Grand by Tennessee Williams. It's nice because it's one of his rarest books in the sense that it was limited to only 300 copies. Nice. And there he signed and numbered the book, so it's a signed limited edition. And it is a book about his grandmother. So as he was living here towards the end of his life, he was contemplating meeting a family, his childhood, and those were the thoughts that were on his mind. All right, well, we're going to head from Tennessee Williams' home to yet another stop on this wonderful literary walking tour of New Orleans. Okay, well, we've made it now to Faulner House Books, one of the only bookstores located in a home of a famous author. Pretty cool. William Faulner wrote his first novel here in New Orleans, also spent a lot of time in the city, spent his honeymoon here, and we are here in Pirates Alley, where apparently you can take a pirate tour or go to a pirate shop or go to a bookstore. Yeah, exactly. Come on across the way here and let's see the plaque. 1840, the building was built. And this is where he wrote his first novel, Soldier's Pay. Now, one little bit about architecture. Both Tennessee Williams' house and Faulkner's house have these great New Orleans-style second-floor porches, don't they, Cathy?
Oh, so wonderful.
And we found that today, while traveling, they've been incredibly nice because they not only offer shade on a hot day, but when it rains unpredictably, like it does often in New Orleans, you can duck under these porches as well. But on our trip for the past week, I brought probably too big a book. I mean, let's face it, this was maybe an error.
Summer.
But it was The Sound and the Fury, and it was the new folio edition, which I like because the folio edition was basically printed the way Faulkner wanted it to be printed, but couldn't during his day. They printed it with different color types to suggest the different time frames. This is a notoriously difficult book to follow. It's stream of consciousness. It's sort of postmodern. You go back and forth in time. But Faulkner suggested to his editors at the time, well, we can maybe make it easier if we could only print in color, but they just they didn't do it. They tried italics and other things. At any rate, the folio edition, quite famous for having done that. And depending on the chapters you're in, you can see that the fonts basically go back and forth. A really interesting book. So Faulkner and Tennessee Williams, both literary sons of New Orleans. Okay, we've made it to Hotel Monte. We're right in the heart of the New Orleans French Quarter, and this is one of the stops on our literary tour where we didn't need to bring any books. Why? Because they're all here. Did you know, Cathy, over 170 books have either been written here or are about this hotel?
So neat.
This is, in fact, the hotel where Truman Capote says he was born. Actually, his mother went into labor while staying at this hotel. It's home of the famous Carousel Bar, but it is also a home for many writers, such as Anne Rice, who wrote here, Eudora Welty, who wrote here, and William Faulkner, who spent his honeymoon here and wrote a little bit of that Sound and the Fury, which we talked about earlier. So from Eudora Welty to Richard Ford, hundreds of authors have stayed here, and let's give the hotel some credit for featuring them in this great window right in the entryway. Well, I hope you've enjoyed our literary walking tour of New Orleans. We're ending today right here with the Ignatius Reilly statue. Ignatius Reilly, the protagonist of John Kennedy Poole's famous book, A Confederacy of Dunces. The book's sort of legendary as being the great Southern novel. It was eventually published after Poole's death, many years after Poole's death, thanks to the work of Walker Percy, who insisted to get published. And at The Scholar, we sell a lot of University Press books, Kathy, and this is probably the best-selling University Press book of all time. It's published by LSU Press and won the Pulitzer Prize, beating out Walker Percy's own book for that year, which is sort of exciting. It's a book which tells a lot about New Orleans, and I think we've seen a lot of New Orleans here today. Well, at any rate, thanks for watching. I hope you'll watch next Friday and every Friday at noon for more adventures in the world of books.